120 warships. That is the number of Iranian vessels the United States Navy has destroyed or disabled since February 28th. 2 carrier strike groups, 8 Aegis destroyers, $40 billion of naval firepower stretched across 2 oceans. And the result? The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. 95% of commercial shipping has disappeared. 3,200 vessels, including 250 oil tankers, sit anchored in the Gulf, going absolutely nowhere. We did not lose a single ship. We did not lose a single engagement. We dismantled the entire Iranian submarine fleet, every corvette, every drone carrier, every major surface combatant Iran ever commissioned. And yet the shipping lane stays shut. The oil stays stuck. The global economy hemorrhages $40 billion every week. Why? Because the most powerful navy in human history had to pick up the phone and call the Air Force. Specifically, they needed an aircraft the Air Force had been trying to retire for years. A 50-year-old airplane conceived in the 1970s to destroy Soviet armor rolling across the European plains. An airplane that senior Pentagon officials publicly called obsolete, redundant, and unfit for modern combat, right up until the moment they needed it more desperately than anything else in the entire inventory. We do not celebrate weapons here, we calculate whether they work. And this particular equation is one of the most counterintuitive we have ever run. To understand why a carrier air wing cannot solve a problem that a Cold War relic solves on its very first sortie, you need to understand the geography. The Strait of Hormuz measures 21 nautical miles across at its narrowest point, but that number lies to you. The actual shipping corridor, the space where tankers must physically move, is 6 nautical miles. 2 miles inbound, 2 miles outbound, 2 miles of buffer between them. That is the entire playable space. Everything outside it is Iranian territorial water. Now, consider what is operating inside that corridor. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy fields more than 1,500 fast attack craft, not warships, speedboats, fiberglass and composite hulls, most weighing under 15 tons. The slowest run 50 knots, the fastest exceeds 70, and Iran claims some of its newest designs can crack 100. These are not the kind of targets radar systems were engineered to track. They sit low in the water, they move faster than most pleasure boats docked in Miami, and each one costs somewhere between $50,000 and $500,000. Every single one carries an anti-ship missile with a 35-kilometer range and a terminal velocity of Mach 0.9, enough to mission kill a frigate. The doctrine is simple and deliberate. 30 to 50 boats attack simultaneously from every direction, overwhelm the sensors, saturate the defenses, force the destroyer to choose which boat to shoot, knowing full well that every missile it fires costs more than every boat it is aimed at. That is the actual problem. Look at the math. An SM-6 interceptor costs $5.3 million. Firing one at a $50,000 speedboat is a 100-to-1 cost exchange in Iran's favor. A Harpoon missile costs $1.5 million and was engineered to track large surface combatants, not composite skiffs doing 70 knots between container ships. The Mark 45 5-inch gun fires 20 rounds per minute, which is impressive against a single target and completely hopeless against 50. The Phalanx CIWS empties its magazine in 20 seconds and requires 4 minutes to reload. And the A-10 Super Hornet, the carrier's primary strike aircraft, costs $30,000 per flight hour, flies too fast to visually separate an IRGC gunboat from a fishing trawler among 3,200 civilian vessels, and its on-station time at full combat loadout is a fraction of what this mission demands. The Navy does have one tool designed for close-in surface threats, the MH-60R Seahawk helicopter. It carries Hellfire missiles, a door-mounted machine gun, and it can patrol, identify, and engage small surface targets. But the Seahawk was built primarily for anti-submarine work. It carries 4 to 8 Hellfires per sortie, has limited loiter endurance compared to a fixed-wing aircraft, and it is vulnerable to the same heavy machine gun fire saturating the strait, without the titanium protection that keeps an A-10 pilot breathing after taking rounds. The Seahawk is a scalpel. The swarm problem needs a chainsaw. The missiles cost too much. The guns are too slow. The jets fly too fast. The helicopters carry too little. That is not a list of bad weapons. That is a pattern. And the pattern points to something fundamental. Every weapon in the carrier strike group's arsenal was designed for blue water, open ocean warfare, high-value targets, long-range engagements. Expensive munitions match to expensive threats. The Strait of Hormuz is brown water, a 6-mile corridor packed with cheap, fast, numerous targets hiding among thousands of civilian ships. The Navy brought a surgical laser to a knife fight, and the knife fight needed a shotgun. The shotgun already existed. The Pentagon just wanted to throw it away. The A-10 Thunderbolt II is built around its gun, literally. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon was designed first. The aircraft was engineered around it afterward. That 7-barrel rotary cannon fires 30mm depleted uranium rounds at 3,900 per minute, 65 rounds every single second. The aircraft carries 1,150 rounds in a drum roughly the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. In a standard 2-second burst, the pilot puts approximately 130 rounds downrange. Cost per round, about $137 for the armor-piercing variant. Run the math. 70 rounds into a fiberglass fast boat equals under $10,000. The same kill with an SM-6 costs $5.3 million. That is a 500-to-1 cost advantage, not a marginal improvement. A categorical shift in the entire economics of the engagement, but the gun is only part of the picture. The A-10 carries 16,000 pounds of ordnance across 11 hardpoints. For medium-range targets, the pilot fires an AGM-65 Maverick, an infrared-guided missile costing between $150,000 and $170,000, still 30 times cheaper than an SM-6. For fast boats mixed with drone threats, the A-10 carries APKWS, a laser guidance kit attached to a standard Hydra 70 rocket. Cost per shot, roughly $35,000, precision guidance at the price of a mid-range sedan. Now consider the physics that make all of this possible at Hormuz. The A-10's maximum speed is Mach 0.75, around 420 miles per hour. When it drops to low altitude and begins patrol loops over the strait, it flies at approximately 300 knots. And that is an advantage, not a limitation. When an FA-18E crosses the shipping lane at 500+ knots, every surface target stays inside the pilot's field of view for less than 2 seconds. At that velocity, distinguishing an IRGC patrol boat from a Kuwaiti fishing dhow among 3,200 civilian vessels is essentially impossible. The A-10 at 300 knots gives the pilot 2 to 3 times longer to identify, confirm, and engage. The pilot looks through the canopy, sees the rocket launchers mounted to the gunnel, sees the military paint, pulls the trigger, and the A-10 will absorb whatever comes back. The pilot sits inside a 12,200-pound titanium tub, the only aircraft in the American inventory that wraps its cockpit in armor built to withstand 23mm armor-piercing rounds and 57mm fragmentation. In Desert Storm, one pilot brought his A-10 home with 378 holes in the airframe. In Iraq in 2003, Captain Kim Campbell lost all hydraulic control over Baghdad. Both primary and backup systems severed simultaneously and flew her aircraft home on manual reversion, a mechanical backup of cranks and cables that bypasses every electronic and hydraulic flight control. She landed safely. A distinguished flying cross followed. That survivability is not theoretical at Hormuz. The IRGC's coastal positions fire 12.7mm and 14.5mm machine guns. An FA-18 avoids that threat by climbing high and loses the ability to identify targets. The A-10 flies low, absorbs the hits, and keeps shooting, because that is precisely what it was designed to do. But no single aircraft holds a 6-mile corridor alone. What is happening above the strait right now is something the American military has never executed in combat at this scale. 3 branches of the armed forces operating simultaneously over a single 6-mile naval corridor, each one covering the gap the others cannot fill. The A-10 flies racetrack patterns at 3,000 feet, hunting fast boats and coastal missile positions. The GAU-8 and APKWS handle close threats. The Maverick handles targets at 12 nautical miles, cost per flight hour, $19,000. Below the A-10, Army AH-64 Apaches operate from expeditionary sea bases, forward floating platforms for Army aviation, staging from Navy vessels to fight a naval battle. Each Apache carries up to 16 Hellfire missiles and a 30mm chain gun. They fly at 200 feet, picking off whatever slips through the layer above. And below all of it, the Navy maintains the air defense umbrella. Aegis destroyers preserve their SM-6 inventory for the threats that actually justify the price. Anti-ship ballistic missiles, cruise missiles flying at Mach 3, the threats nothing else can intercept. Here is what the combined arms equation actually delivers. Before this integration, the Navy was engaging fast boats with $5.3 million interceptors against $50,000 targets, draining the vertical launch cells that are also needed for Tomahawks, SM-2s, and ESSM quad packs. After integration, the A-10 handles fast boats for $10,000 per engagement. The Apache handles close threats for $70,000. The Navy preserves its missile inventory for Mach 3 threats that nothing else can stop. The VLS cells last 10 times longer. The entire math flips. Iran's strategic miscalculation was assuming the Navy would fight this battle alone. Their swarm doctrine was deliberately engineered to drain vertical launch cells, 1,500 fast boats against 96 launch tubes. The arithmetic was intentional. The IRGC studied the 2002 Millennium Challenge wargame, where a retired Marine general used swarm tactics to sink 16 American warships in the opening hours, and Iran built an entire naval strategy around that result. But they built it for a scenario where the Navy answers by itself. They never accounted for the Air Force flying at 3,000 feet with a gun that fires 65 rounds per second. They never accounted for the Army flying at 200 feet with laser-guided missiles launched from a Navy ship. The equation changes when the variables change. So the answer to the question that opened this is not that the Navy is weak. The Navy was engineered for blue water, open ocean, capital ship warfare. Precision weapons measured in hundreds of nautical miles. The Strait of Hormuz is brown water, 6 miles wide, 1,500 composite speedboats, cheap threats requiring cheap answers. A good engineer does not use a precision torque wrench to drive a nail. A good engineer selects the right tool. The irony is that the right tool was an airplane the Air Force had been trying to discard for a decade. $19,000 per flight hour versus $30,000. $10,000 per kill versus $5.3 million. The answer to a problem costing the global economy billions in stranded oil every single week. A 50-year-old aircraft flying 300 knots with a cannon that weighs more than a compact car. The A-10 will eventually retire. Congress currently prohibits the Air Force from reducing the fleet below 103 aircraft through September 2026, but the transition plan beyond that remains unresolved. The question is not whether to keep the Warthog forever. The question is, what fills the gap when it leaves? Loitering munitions with 30mm cannons, the MQ-9 Reaper adapted for maritime interdiction, or perhaps the Navy finally builds its own brown water weapon, an aircraft designed not for the deep ocean, but for the narrow, contested corridors, where the wars of this century are actually being fought. We do not worship the machine, we worship the equation, and the equation is unambiguous. The right tool wins, not the most expensive one.